So Kavita Chandran, excuse me, um, uh, is trained by the Solutions Journalism Network and is part of that group. She's also a trainer for Reuters, for Thomson Reuters Foundation. She has been a journalist for more than 25 years and has done everything from the kind of front page all the way on up through producing and editing. She is an expert on a number of areas, including climate change, which I know a number of you are interested in, but she's here today to talk about labor issues and the supply chain, and there's a lot to get into here. We have been in communication for a number of years trying to make this happen, and we're so excited to welcome here today. So please join me in welcoming Kavita. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hi, guys. Some familiar faces because I'm a trainer. I've taught a few of you through the Reuters Foundation. And so my name's Kavita, and I'm a consultant. I'm a media consultant, but I do teach journalists as well as undergrad and grad students on journalism and communications, but largely with the Thomson Reuters Foundation is where I train trainees or journalists such as yourself on a huge list of topics from climate and just transition to modern slavery, which is what we are talking about today, to social injustice. There's a lot to business journalism. My background is I'm a former financial journalist, and then I moved on and became a trainer. So I was with Reuters prior to the Reuters Foundation. And so today I'm going to just focus on one aspect of modern slavery training that I do. And typically, this is like a 2-week training, but I've done a crash course for you guys for today. And because your focus is on international trade, I thought it's very important to talk about, and I'm supposed to move this myself. So the most important component of international trade, someone can help me, is or are labor rights, yeah, in supply chain. What do we need for all of that to happen? Goods, okay. 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 All of that is right, but you can't do anything without people. Right? So today we're going to be focusing on the people that make trade happen. So for anything, whether it's business or services, nothing can happen if you don't have enough what we refer to as resources. But in other words, we're just talking about people, right? So today I'm going to just focus on you guys understanding what slavery is in this world of international trade. This is from the ILO. There is an invisible workforce consisting of millions of laborers from some of the poorest corners of Asia. I've been in Singapore for 13 years, and one of the topics is modern slavery. And as I travel around Asia, I do come across a lot of labor issues and labor exploitation that's happening, a lot to benefit the profits of corporate world across, whether it's West or East. And today is, the focus is on labor exploitation, but I want to first start by making sure you guys understand what modern slavery is, what human trafficking is. Are they different? Are they same? A lot of people use them interchangeably, and it's very important to first understand if you're talking about people within international trade, people who make the raw materials, who gather the raw materials, people who package them, people who ultimately lead to companies branding products. And who are these people? So exploitation in a very simple way of explaining, is when these people are not in a position to leave. That's what it is, right? So I could willingly work for a palm oil company, but tomorrow I don't want it and I want to go jump and go do some other job. I should not have my passport confiscated or something which does not allow me to leave, yeah? So exploitation by the UN is a very simple explanation when it comes to business and supply chains for people. People who are working should have the ability to leave any situation of work whenever they want, yeah? Now, in order for us to understand, this is often very interchangeably used. Is modern slavery the same as human trafficking? I've seen a lot of stories going on. There's a current story going on in England of a very huge Indian family that have, that have now been jailed because they have, they got in folks for domestic servitude and confiscated their passport, etc. So they've been using human trafficking in the story. It's very important to understand that people are trafficked into slavery. And when they are, quote unquote, a slave, are they being exploited or not? So the trafficking is just a mechanism or conduit that leads people to slavery. So very important as journalists, are you using the term right? Are you just saying trafficking, and do you really mean that this is exploitation happening in the ground after this person has been trafficked from Myanmar to Thailand, for example? Yeah, so terminology is very, very important, and we will be talking about that. Also the phrase modern slavery, for example, in India, they don't refer to it at all. They don't understand, maybe they understand it, but they don't understand why is it modern, and why is it slavery? Slavery was abolished long ago. I don't know how many of you know Juneteenth, that US has a day off now. So modern is just for people to understand that even though you think slavery is abolished, in modern day, in many ways it's still being used, whether it's domestic servants, whether it is people in factories, and are they being exploited or not? Okay, so before I go to supply chain slavery, I just wanted you guys to understand trafficking and the difference, yeah? So what fuels trafficking? If you can look on your slide, it is a very easy way for a trafficker to make money. High rewards, low risk. Because of the way the poor law enforcement is in many parts of Asia, it's very easy for a trafficker to get away with it. You very rarely read stories about traffickers who were caught and, have been, whatever, jailed for a long time. They just get in and out. It's a huge nexus. So it's a very easy way to gain profits. The supply and demand ratio, there are many people looking for jobs, right? There are a lot of people wanting to get out of the situation they are in, whether it's climate refugees, whether it's war, persecution, whatever it is, that their demand is high, the supply is high of people. If you just look at them as commodities, sorry to say that, but that's what for international trade people become. You can stop me at any time and ask questions, guys, if you want, okay? So I'm just going to give you some facts just for Thailand. More than 600,000 trafficked victims just for work. Most of them come from Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos. Most of them are in the industry of seafood, construction, and textile. Tier 2 watch list since 2016. This is the watch list that the US has, the US Customs has, for countries that are actually using or they've been exposed to poor working conditions, so they put like a ban on a few things from those countries. US imports 63% of fish from Thailand. And so the Thai government currently is actively implementing legislation to combat modern slavery. They recognize it and they're working towards combating it. Sorry, I did want to mention, because Anne said solutions journalism, and I sort of never talked about it. I'm not training you guys on solutions journalism today. I would love to, but I think if I do have time, I'll just mention how you could actually write stories even around modern slavery or climate transition using a solutions lens, but that's a completely different topic. Today, I'm just going to be focusing on business supply chains. Okay, so moving on. I just want you guys to understand who is a traffic victim. So if the UN Office on Drugs and Crime basically has tried to make it simple, and they say, okay, how do you recognize someone is trafficked? So they are trafficked into slavery or exploitation. So they call it the way they say is act, means, and purpose. So the first block is act, which basically means that in what way was the person trafficked? So the trafficker must do one of the following things: recruit people, transport them, transfer them, harbor them, receive them. This is an act that is being done. What is the way that they did it? Using one or more of these methods: threat or use of coercion or force, fraud, deception, abuse of a position of vulnerability, giving payments of benefits, abduction. So people were essentially forced into doing this particular work. And then once they got there, they were exploited. So this is how UN defines trafficking. So if you were to talk to someone, let's say you're covering a factory, you need to make sure that you kind of check these boxes. So you know that they're exploited, but you want to make sure, did they come willingly? Were they forced or not? There's a big word, consent, over here. And people talk about it all the time. And they say, well, it was out of consent. But the UN also says that consent is actually not as important, because a lot of time they are controlled to give that consent, right? So it could even be a sort of a mental, trauma, or some of them, you all have heard of Stockholm Syndrome. Some of them have so much trust in the trafficker that they will just do anything that they ask them to do. So it's the control that the person has on their mental judgment. Okay, so now the question arises, so we all know this is happening, so many people are trafficked, etc., etc. Are there no laws? So there are laws, and this is pretty new. Basically, a company has a responsibility to respect the human rights of all workers in its supply chain, even if those workers are not its own employee. This is what has now been ruled by many countries, saying, you might have, Nike is a huge example, you might have Nike shoes that finally get trademarked as Nike was the swoosh, but they've gone through Africa, Asia, and all of those supply chains. Should Nike be responsible if a subcontractor is abusing its people in Vietnam? Yes. So that is where the laws have come in now. There are laws that the UK has. There are laws that the US has recently implemented. Biden signed on the Uyghur law just to make sure that companies who use products that are made out of Xinjiang, should declare it. There is a fine of $1 million. There are all sorts of things. So these are the countries that have now recently implemented modern slavery laws. They actually call it modern slavery laws. And if you notice, we're talking about big countries. We're talking about G20. So none of these are your Southeast Asia small places where people are desperate for jobs. So these are the countries where you are receiving the products. Quickly, I want to tell you, in terms of story, it's very important to understand three things. If you're writing about people and where they come from, oops. You need to know that typically it's not like someone's just taken from Myanmar and moved to India and they've got their job. There is always a route that they have to follow. So if you're tracking if you're tracking exploitation, you need to understand what was the source, where did they originate, why did they want to leave that place? Where did they transit? Sometimes it takes months and years for people to reach their final destination where they are hired. Yeah? So when they were transiting, which clearly means that there is border control, which is probably not doing the job that they're meant to be doing, right? So it's a huge nexus. A lot of them are also women, by the way. 30% of traffickers in the world are actually women. So this is something for you guys to understand, to trace down a person, and when they're being exploited, where did they come from? How did they finally reach the destination? This picture is actually from a cell where a bunch of workers in Thailand were found, and they were working for a company, all from Myanmar, running from the persecution. So as business journalists, so if you are covering international trade, you need to understand where is the product coming from. Yeah, so if I give the example of Nike again, let's say we are only talking about the lace that is being made. And if it is coming from, the cotton or whatever the lace is made of is coming from Vietnam, the supply and the demand is what results in forced labor. So if you look at the supply side of human beings or people that are being used in the business supply chain, most of them are very vulnerable. They are poor. They either have identity issues or have been discriminated against. There is very limited protection in terms of labor rights, and also they have authoritarian regimes or something of that sort. So they really want to get out of it. So it's very important to understand, why are they so desperate? So where is this product coming from? Is it from a very small village in some part of Asia? And why would they want to get out? And why is the supply high over there is important to understand. And if you look at the demand side, concentrated corporate power and ownership, outsourcing, irresponsible sourcing practices, governance gaps. This is where the trafficker takes advantage of the fact that there is a demand of these people and I can check all of this and get away with it. And all of this ends up resulting in forced labor. Now, the other way, product destination. Sorry, I've just taken an example of Nike. I have nothing against them, but I did have an Apple thing earlier, but I moved it to Nike. So if you look at where the final product ends up in, they can't understand. So if now we're not looking at the company and the business supply chain. Now we're looking at the people of this side and the people on that side that fall in this whole chain. So now at retail level, these are the countries that have signed modern slavery laws. Those countries themselves experience very low levels of vulnerability. They buy products from countries with high risk for slavery. They themselves cannot regulate labor conditions. They can't monitor production. And all they care about is top line and bottom line. So there is a disconnect of understanding what life is like where the product is sourced from, and what life is like when the product reaches the destination. So it's important for people to read more on where is what you wear coming from. People do not enslave people to be mean to them. They do it to make a profit. It's as simple as that. It's business as far as companies are concerned. Kevin Bales is, you should look up Free the Slaves. There's a website as well. He's written a book. He's a professor. He's been talking about modern slavery for years now. This is the latest ILO stats. Out of almost 25 million people who are trapped in forced labor. 16 million people are exploited in the private sector, such as domestic work, construction, or agriculture. This is the latest thing. How much profit does human trade generate for businesses per year? Anyone knows the answer to this? Trillion per year. Okay, anyone else? Does that seem too high or too low? So as per what they know, it's 150 billion per year. Just the profit made from the use of human beings to do the businesses of companies. So if you look at this particular chart over here from the ILO, it breaks down the annual profits at 150 billion into regions, and you can see Asia Pacific is pretty high over there. So there is a lot of, the reason is because there is ample resources of people that are looking for jobs here. It's okay to use them as long as they are not being exploited. It comes down to that. Are they given meaningful jobs? Can they leave? Are they trapped? And that's what labor exploitation is all about. So for example, sand is big business because of construction all over the world. This was a story done by Reuters Foundation, where one of the reporters went to cover people who actually go all the way down to a sand port or sand pit in a place in India. And is this exploitation or not? So this person earns more than the minimum wage. Nobody forced them to do this job, but the working hours are really long. It's very hazardous working conditions. Why do they do it? Because once again, the source, where do they come from? There's poverty, there's lack of job options, poor payments in other jobs. So they sort of they are forced to do this. A lot of people say, well, but you know, everyone's, their minimum wages have increased, so what's the problem? But you see, exploitation is about long working hours, right? It's about not just giving them extra money, but stopping the work when they should be entitled to stop the work, yeah? So I'm just going to go through, and this as well, for example, this is the hands of one of the guys working there. They're never given any proper gear as they're going down. They just, you know, so even I've helped folks write stories on even renewable energy, parts of solar panels and all. There's no thinking around, this is labor, don't they need proper gear, gloves, etc. And those are stories that need to be written, yeah? This over here is, oops. This over here is a picture from, Malaysia, Samidabi plantation. That's the world's largest palm oil producer. And they've actually been recently, there's a US ban on their product because labor violations in the plantations were reported. This one here is an example of the Aceh province in Indonesia. Fishing is a huge business and it's high-risk industry for forced labor. This here is an example from India, a tea plantation, huge, big, booming business around the world. Sorry, the picture's not too clear. And what happened here was this story was written around, there was a huge climate issue in Kenya, which was actually supplying tea at that point to the West. And because tea supply was stopped, this particular area in Assam in India was forced to make their people do overwork so they could compensate for the extra tea that was required because of shortage. Okay, so is modern slavery something that UN SDG covers? Yes, and very few people know about this. So the goal number 8 has a 8.7 point over there, which talks about slavery and human trafficking. take immediate and effective measures to eradicate forced labor, end modern slavery and human trafficking, and secure the prohibition and elimination of the worst forms of child labor, including recruitment and use of child soldiers, and by 2025, end child labor in all its forms. I don't see any stories being written. 2025 is not that far away. Okay. So that's the SDG goal on decent work and economic growth. I'm going to see if I can, would it be possible to watch this video or just a little bit, or we could even send it to them later. But this was how Nike was exposed. 7 News Australia actually went to a sweatshop factory in Malaysia. It was like a sting operation. And a lot of times, by the way, you can't figure out which company these people are working for because they don't even put like a logo or whatever. And it so happened that this reporter happened to be in an area where I think he saw a swoosh or something, again, Nike, and his whole expose was when he walked in with a sting camera. So this entire story, you should watch it later on, exposes how people cramped up spaces, using one bathroom, and just a lot of exploitation. And that led to Nike, in its annual report every year, putting a point down about how they are responsible for, in their business supply chain, if there's any sort of exploitation happening. So this was a very big story that came out of Australia. And they talked about Vietnam and Malaysia labor exploitation. Okay, so as journalists, how do you track a business supply chain and write your story? A lot of it comes from research. You have to first understand that in your country, what are the products that are sourced? What raw material in your country goes to make something that ends up in a retail store somewhere and is big business? Once you figure out what is the raw material, you need to then dig deeper. Where do the raw materials come from? Again, where are they assembled? Who provides the labor for the extraction of the raw material and assembly of the product? Who finances the making of the product? All these are story ideas and story news pegs. Who profits at each stage of the product cycle? Who are the intermediate and end consumers of the product? There is a lot that as journalists you will need to know in order to dig deeper into supply chains. Sadly, it's not easy at all. And that's one of the reasons these stories don't get written. And if you look at your screen, how difficult is it going to be for you as a journalist to track a supply chain? So if you look over here, somewhere down in Africa is a raw material supplier. And then the subcontractor goes all the way to Southeast Asia, where those products are probably taken and then, maybe collected together, packaged together, and then you go further up, there's another contract manufacturer who'll assemble them together. There could be 2 parts, maybe someone in Africa, maybe someone in Asia, and then it comes all the way to Europe for packaging and logistics, and then all the way back, all the way to the brand company for the trademarking, and then it reaches the consumer. So you can see we're using many, many different countries for just one product, right? It involves cross-border reporting. So that is something that needs to be done more of. It's investigative journalism. There isn't that many stories tracking supply chains. But if you're able to at least figure out if you belong to the part of the world where raw materials are collected, or if you belong to the part of the world where people are used to assemble stuff, you can at least start joining the dots. It's not going to be easy. That's why these stories don't get written. But that's only because it's so difficult to track the contractors and the subcontractors and anyone who's involved in the final, the brand. So as journalists, you have to use the right terminologies. So just going back to trafficking versus modern slavery versus smuggling versus migration, there is a big difference and helps shape audience perceptions on what is going on in the world. Very important to interpret data sources. We need to do more of including data in our stories and interpreting them. A lot of times for trafficking stories, they have data on the source, the transit, the destination. It's important when you use the right terminology and educate your reader or your watcher on what it is. It boosts your credibility as a reporter as well. And you have an impact, and basically that's responsible reporting. Very important to provide context. This is something, as an editor in the newsroom, I've always talked about, the nutcraft, the why, etc., all of which you guys probably know. But when you're covering business supply chains, labor exploitation, in your writing from your country, you have to provide context about the why in your country. What is happening? What's the background? Why are people poor? Why do people need to leave? So all of that context should be provided in a story where you're talking about labor exploitation. Contract slavery is, according to the ILO, the fastest growing form of modern slavery in the world today. Anyone knows what contract slavery is? The word contract is a contract. Yeah. So that is very modern, right? You take people who are moving to the Middle East from one country, you take people who are going for jobs to other countries, all of them legally sign some sort of an agreement between two parties. Individuals are forced into servitude through debt bondage. Anyone knows what debt bondage is? Yes, exactly. So it's bonded labor where I might say I want to go to Dubai to work, but I really don't have the money to pay the agency. So they say, all right, don't worry about the money. Just work for us in this factory for a year, right? And that's the debt you owe us. So now I am stuck because I promised that I'm going to work with them for a year, and I'm stuck in this really bad exploitative environment. Provisions that require the individual to work long hours without breaks. This is against the law, right? So you need to know that is exploitation. Pathetic living condition. Confiscation of passport is one of the first things everybody needs to understand. You cannot take someone's legal document and keep it away, even if it's someone who's a domestic, person who's working as a helper at home, or people who are working for companies. That is completely it's not under the law. So you have to report all these things. Okay. I know this is post-lunch and it's kind of not the best thing to be doing, but if you guys, you have your phones and your laptops, go to globalslaveryindex.org right now. Use your phones or your laptops. Just giving you a sense of how you can find a story. globalslaveryindex.org. In there, you should find methodology on the right side somewhere. Yeah? Under methodology, there's a link, I think it's the fourth one or fifth one, on G20 imports. And you click on it, it gives you a list of products. Has anyone seen that? Yeah? It starts with bricks, I think. How many products can you find from your country which says it's at risk of modern slavery? This is a great resource, by the way. You should just play around with this website. There's a lot of information here. Anyone able to find a product or more products from whichever country you want to cover or are part of, which you feel is, it says, is at risk of modern slavery? Many? Like what? Cotton, yeah. Yeah? Okay, so here you found a product. So if you were hunting for a story, you find a product, and I mean, this is the World Wide Web. Just go in and search which particular area is cotton grown the most in my country. If you're a reporter, you will then want to go and say, where is this supplied? Which brand is this cotton used in? Right? And you're probably onto something. Go find out what's the labor conditions over there. How are people living? How are they removing the cotton? What do they do with it? What is the supply chain over there? So just giving you an idea of where do you start. This is a good place to at least find out what are the products that are used. Are you able to find one place where these products are found in abundance? Clearly, if you're able to find it, chances are companies already did many years ago and found a way to get people from there to help remove that product and package it and all for it. So it's not the product, it's the people and what they do with that product at the source level that can lead to a story that's going to happen. Anybody else has found any product at risk of modern slavery? Something you didn't know or something you knew but you hadn't really thought of? Carpets. Yeah. India, Pakistan, and stones. Like, do you mean bricks or stones? Yeah. Did you know that? Okay. Brick kilns are huge. Bricks are made in a lot in Asia, many in South Asia. They use a lot of child labor because you need little hands to put the stuff together, the design together. It's one of the largest industries of exploitation, brick kilns. So there's, so if you have to first track down the source and the product, and that's where your story begins. Anyone else? Anything else you found that's interesting?
Because you talk about modern slavery,
Yeah.
and you talked about trafficked persons, and I always assumed that it was okay for employers in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to hold on to passports of Filipinos. I never thought of it as slavery, but this is what the Philippine government agrees to. This is what the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia agrees to. Are you saying that this is part of modern slavery?
Yes, as part of, as per how United Nations defines it, when a person has no way to leave, they are a slave.
So that's what's happening to Filipinos in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
It could be Saudi
And in
Arabia, it
Kuwait
could
and
be,
in-
yeah, it could be, like I said, even domestic servitude. You'll be surprised how many journalists themselves who've attended my training have said, oh, well, in my home, we keep the passports. It's a small thing you think, but you just made someone not in a position to leave because you held on to something that belongs to you. All of us work in corporate environment. If I hate one company, I should be entitled to leave and go into another. Why should that not be so for someone who is from a poorer country or desperately needed a job and is forced to hold on to that exploitative situation because they cannot leave?
Okay, when I get home, I'm going to talk to the Secretary of the Department of Migrant Workers.
Yeah.
But what document can I cite to him that this is modern slavery.
So if you go to the UNDP website and the ILO, the International Labour Organization, they clearly talk about how confiscation of passport is actually illegal. I can send you links that you should read. This is also lack of awareness. A lot of people are not even aware that they can't. And this is the same story, the Hinduja story that's been going on in the UK right now of this really rich family and how they exploited domestic servants. And one of the things is that they confiscated the passports. No one thought it was wrong, but they're in jail now. So it's an important factor to know. Yes.
Hi, I thank you again for your discussion. Actually, I work a lot on modern slavery and human trafficking as
excellent.
well. And you should look at the OEC of the DMW, the Overseas Employment Certificate. Maybe that's somewhere to start as well. But also on related to what she said, because I'm also Filipino.
Yeah.
Filipinos, I think, just for a little bit of context, we're one of the most exported people
Yes,
in the
and
world.
even Singapore, the number one maid agencies or helpers are all Filipinos.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier a bunch of countries with laws against human trafficking. I was wondering about countries with laws that are, what have you observed about countries with laws that are indirectly encouraging human trafficking? Because, for example, for the Philippines, the current Marcos administration is sort of leveraging labor export to gain favor with investments, for example, in Kuwait, in Saudi Arabia, and also in Singapore.
Yeah.
It's basically relaxing laws to gain investments, and I'm not sure about other countries, but what have you observed? And that sort of encourages modern
Yeah.
slavery and practices that are associated with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I'm not privy to such deep information, but I can tell you that when governments allow this to happen, as long as certain laws are in place, for example, this thing that we just mentioned about passport confiscation, if there is an understanding between two countries that you will be helping us by taking our people, giving them money, giving them jobs, but they should be able to come back if they don't like that job, right? So that understanding, because again, we're talking about human rights violation, right? If I can leave a job because I don't like it, that should be true for anyone on this earth. So that is what, if you can't do that, then you're bonded, then you're trapped, right? And therefore you're exploited. So it could also be that they have 12 hours of horrible working conditions, 8 people in one room using, like all of that. But tomorrow he could take a flight and go back, right? He's not a slave. So that's very important. When this kind of treaties come into being, are they thinking about the security and safety of the laborer who's involved? But those are story ideas to investigate, yeah.
Hi, Kavita.
Hi.
This is Meena Kotwal from India. You are saying about why they are doing slavery. I think there should be a point caste, because in India or in Asian countries there is a caste-based discrimination, and because of their caste they don't get job, they don't get education, they don't get respect because. Historical caste-based discrimination exists in today's, and I am searching a report, and GFOD, Global Forum of Communication Discriminated on Work and Descent, which is saying that about 50% of the world's trafficked people are in India, and the majority of them are Dalits.
Yeah.
So it should be caste-based discrimination.
Yeah, so, no, and fair point. Identity and discrimination is one of the reasons for supply. So like I said, Meena, I teach this over a 1-week period. Business and supply chains is just one module. There's a lot that we look into it. Why are people forced into forced labor, for example, right, in certain countries? So casteism in India and in many parts of other areas is huge, and you're forced it's what we call, so what, one of the things we do in our trainings is we make a list of aspirations and desperations, right? As a human being, what do you aspire for? What you aspire for is going to be the same thing which a teenager in some remote village aspires for, right? Good health, education, safety, etc., etc. But what is your environment versus their environment, right? What forces them to say, okay, fine, I need to leave. I need to leave and be part of the supply chain because there's high demand. These are called push and pull factors, right? There are factors that pull me into exploitation, right? There are factors that push me into exploitation, right? Caste is one of those things. If I'm discriminated against and I'm a low caste Dalit who is not being recognized or given any sort of preference on anything that's done in my village, right? Then I might as well befriend a trafficker who's promising me that he's going to take me to Dubai for something. Doesn't matter how exploited I am, but I need to get out from here. But they promise, that's the thing, there are law enforcement on traffickers, it's high profit because there's very little punishment for traffickers in countries. They're soon forgotten. And like I said, the trust is very high. These could be people who've lived in the same village for year after year, and they are, Malik is another reference given to them in Indian villages, where I trust this person. There are girls who flee with such people on promises, right? So that's all exploitation that happens. Sex slavery is a huge form of exploitation and modern slavery. But you're right. But that's not to be discussed for supply chains, but you're right that it is there. Identity and discrimination is a part of the reason there is supply. Ronnie.
Hi, Kavita. I probably maybe a bit skip about this, but I want to ask questions about, is it also applied to child labor that the source that you mentioned before? And the second questions were, other than investigative journalism, how to reflect it into solutions journalism if we want to, just probably a little bit.
My quick crash course on solutions journalism. So to answer your first question, yes, child labor is a huge slavery issue. And I was just talking about brick kilns is one of them, but in many countries, using children for slavery. Sugarcane is another field where a lot of children are used. What is solutions journalism? Solutions journalism is when you take the same problem, which has been written to death by people so much that people are not reading about climate stories anymore because they figured it out what's going on in this world, right? But as a climate journalist, for example, you still need to continue writing these stories. How do you make sure people are still going to read them? There is a term called news fatigue. Believe it or not, people don't want to read your news anymore. There's so much of bad news going on in this world. No one really wants your news. But how do you tell them that there is actually a solution? But at the same time, you still talk about the problem, right? So just to give you a case in point, sugarcane fields, child labor. There was a story, so I also mentor journalists after I'm done with the training. One of the stories that came out from one of my trainings where I wanted this guy to use a solutions lens was in an area where there was child labor being used for sugarcane farming. What they would do is they actually marry young children, so there's child marriage, because you need them to work in pairs. You need one person to chop and the other person to stack. So it has to be done as a combination of a couple. So youngsters, child labor, all of that. And this reporter went on site and found a community of people that were trying to stop this child marriages from happening. And what they do was they had alerted all the villagers and they said, okay, every time you get an invite for a wedding, you need to tell us. So they get forwarded on WhatsApp invites of weddings, and then they crack down, figure out these are kids, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, and then they just walk into the wedding and stop this wedding from happening. It's part of the municipal government's plan in that particular village. So that's a solution, right, to a large problem of child marriage. But hey, guess what? Someone is doing something to fix it, right? So this is just a quick way of explaining to you that you would write the same story about child marriage and trafficking inside sugarcane fields, but your approach is through somebody who's trying to fix it. And that's what solutions journalism is. Not propaganda, not doing PR puffery for people, but just saying that there are people who are trying to fix something. Let's focus and hold them accountable for the work that they're supposed to be doing. That's what solutions journalism is. And you could apply it on anything, whether it's climate, whether it's any sort of humanitarian issue, which has been written so much right now that people and your readers are not really interested because they know what's going on. And you suddenly give them a solution. Everyone's interested. Everyone wants some good happening and wants to know who are the people who are doing good. So what also happens when you start writing about NGOs and startups and social entrepreneurs is they better up their game. It's not just about promising, oh, we are promising we're going to be doing this, but at the end of the day, if you're not being written about, these are all false promises. So if we start writing about these people, then more people will try and bring about positive change.
Okay, we are going to have to end it there. We're actually at time.
Sorry, okay.
No, this was a wonderful conversation. Everyone, please feel free to do your business card exchanges as you've been doing with the other speakers, and you can always reach out to folks through the agenda. Kavita, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.